right, so we're back and we're going to talk now about this theme of a family dynamic of people working from home, especially people with kids. And as the sole parent on this panel, Miley, talk to us about how it's been working with your kid.
It's been a challenge for sure, especially since we weren't given any kind of notice, and then all of a sudden it's like, "Hey, your preschool is closed." And I think it really differs for people that have older kids. Like I feel like kids, it really doesn't matter what phase you're in. There's different challenges. But for me, having a 3-year-old and trying to navigate those waters with having two working parents, the way Darren and I have been able to work that out is basically we've been taking shifts, but we happen to be really fortunate because some people aren't even able to do that.
Right.
So he basically takes the morning shift, and then I take the afternoon slash evening shift, which basically means that I get not very much sleep,
Yeah.
because ultimately, even still, like most of the caregiving kind of comes from me, and
Mm.
uh, I think that's a real struggle. Actually, I was on Twitter the other day, and I retweeted this tweet, which I thought was kind of indicative of where we're at, especially as academics. But it was like this tweet from a doctor, and she says, people are telling junior faculty with kids at home to catch up on writing or submit a grant need to stop. It is impossible. This is on average worse for women because they're more likely to have a partner who also works from home.
Mhm.
And I think it just kind of exposes some of the inequities in our society as well.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, we are all in academia, which is a very hard profession to begin with. I mean, pretty much anytime you're trying to look for a job, it feels like the Hunger Games. But then
So true.
you add on top of that this whole additional stress of if you're a woman, you still have to be just as productive as your male counterparts who possibly their spouse is a stay-at-home parent, uh, uh, taking care of the young kids. So I mean, women in academia are more likely to have spouses that are also working. So whereas I feel like men in academia, that might not be as true.
There's an
Um,
article that came across my desk today, or my virtual desk, I guess it was email or something, but it said that early submission data
Mhm.
from article or from journals says that
Yeah.
the pandemic has impacted female academics not able to submit articles because
Yep.
they don't have time. They're busy taking care of the kids and whatever. So we're seeing this hit, and they're seeing it specifically for women and not for men.
Yeah, and I see that for myself where I'm staying up till five, like 5 o'clock in the morning trying to get my coursework done, getting like 3 hours of sleep, knowing that I'm gonna have to wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning and take care of my daughter so that my husband can also attend his meetings. And it's a real challenge. And then talk about the stress. I mean, you already experience stress as working parents, and then you add this additional stress. There's been a lot of news articles lately about how this has led to, definitely not in my case, but it has led to interpersonal violence.
Right.
And I can't even imagine like being in a situation where you have young kids, you're dealing with this really stressful situation, you lost your job, and then you're stuck in this relationship where you can't get out of it. I
A
mean,
Mhm.
part
there's
On the flip side too, in line with what Miley was saying about this bringing up inequities, for men too, like, I feel like, so, like, I had a student that reached out to me, a while ago that was male, and he was having what sounded to me like domestic abuse issues, and there was nowhere for me to send him in my county. I mean, I knew about women's resources, but there was nowhere for men, and I can imagine that even things that men are experiencing that men honestly always experience on some level, but perhaps there's an inequity an imbalance in how we treat it or what resources they're given or whether it's validated at all that it's even happening with them is just being exacerbated now too in the same kind of vein, but with the flipped side of the gender role, I guess.
Sure. And the expectation being different. So, like, going back to the childcare thing, we have a male colleague that was just speaking the other day about how is talking to some female colleagues, and they are all on, I think, working on a grant together or a paper or something, and they were discussing how they have these things they want done, and he's like, I have to take care of my kid. I can't do those things, and he's met with this sort of digital blank stare to be like, what do you mean? Because they're not expecting that he is taking care of the kids. So it's
Right.
kind of this flipped thing, like even when men are in that situation of they have to take care of the kids, not only is it can they not do it just like women can't do it, but they also have this expectation of people that they shouldn't have that problem.
Mhm.
So it's kind of along the
It,
same
it,
lines as the domestic violence. Go ahead, Ben.
yeah, it almost feels like it's just exacerbated all of the issues that were already underlying. There were already more challenges on women than there were on men, particularly, I guess, on average, for what proportion of housework or what proportion of childcare is being done. But now it feels like the coronavirus kind of just expanded that. And there's always been kind of the same expectation that men don't have any childcare responsibilities and can't have any childcare responsibilities and need to focus on their job. But then this kind of just expanded that as well. And so it seems like it's just kind of widened the gaps that were already there.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, to widen the gaps that are already there. I like that. And Angie had said that too, exacerbating these issues that we've always known to be a problem, but then we're just stress testing the entire structure and we're finding the weak points that we knew were there, but now are failing. Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to touch on a light note as a person without kids. When I am in a Zoom meeting with colleagues who have young kids and they come and jump all over mommy, I think it is the most hilarious thing and it makes my day a bit better. So I
I
appreciate
agree with
you,
that.
parents, and yeah.
I have seen some of that too. Just some social media stuff that's come across of like watching little kid run in and everything, and I do feel like a lot of people are extending grace in that
Mhm.
situation to just understanding that kids are going to come bother you, and that's okay. I mean, obviously it's not going to be in every industry, but I do see that, and I think appreciate that, and I think that that's something that we can all come together on is this grace extending to people in those situations. So childcare is one thing, and having the child and doing your job. But another aspect of this that I think would be would be valuable to discuss is what about the kids actually processing what's happening? I mean, because their routine has been upset as well, right? Like they are in the middle of this pandemic just like we are. And I think sometimes it's easy, especially for me with as a person without kids, to kind of forget that this is some kind of formative influence. And when I think about the students that I'm teaching now that are college age and that were, during 9/11 were kind of young and they had this formative thing that they went through but kind of weren't at an adult level of processing at that place, but it had this impact growing up. So do you think we're going to see that with kids going through this now?
I definitely see that with my child. I mean, she's only 3, but she does ask me all the time, like, why she can't go to school.
Right.
And she tells me that she misses her friends, and it kind of breaks my heart. Um,
Mhm.
and it's very difficult for her to understand, even though I say to her, like, there's a virus out there. We're trying to keep you safe. Um, One thing that I have been looking into because I do know, as a psychologist, obviously, that this could be very impactful for her life, especially the fact that she's 3 years old. So your first memories really form around this age. Um, is trying not to being very careful with my words. So we talk about how mommy and daddy are trying to keep her safe rather than making it like, oh, the world is so dangerous and you
Yeah.
can't touch anything because everything's so dangerous and you could get sick, eat sick. I think it's just being able to reframe things where it's just like, oh, we're trying to keep you safe. Mommy and daddy are trying to keep you safe. And so we want to make this more of a safe environment than a dangerous one, because I really feel like that could really influence her view of the world later on, especially considering that she can't really process a lot of these things. I mean, and kids pick up really bizarre phobias. I mean, like for instance, she's afraid of insects, like any kind of flying insect. If it comes near her, she just starts freaking out. And she recalls like when her best friend got bitten by ants. So
Oh,
she has this kind of like fear about insects and so forth. And I just know that at this stage, especially with her imagination really blooming, I really don't want to feed into that in any way, shape, or form. And so I just really am very cognizant about how I frame things. But also, as a parent and a working parent, I think one of the biggest struggles for me is like having that push pull kind of feeling where I feel like I need to get all these things done. And I feel like although some of the expectations have loosened, not really, too. I feel like it's like you just have to kind of the messages that you get are like, you just have to plow through it, just get through it, get it
mhm.
done, get it, uh, get through it. And for me, I feel like this push pull, because if I really want to get things done, I'm going to have to sit my kid in front of the TV. I know as a psychologist the detrimental effects of putting my kid in front of the TV and like having the electronic babysitter. So I really, really struggle when I have these crunch periods where I have to get things done, and I feel a lot of mom guilt for putting her in front of the TV for hours. I like my husband and I have really made a very conscious effort where she doesn't watch very much TV other than at night where we watch a movie together. But then there are these times where there's just no way. We have back to back to back to back meetings. I just can't. But I just feel such guilt surrounding that.
I have to admit, I don't, again, I don't have kids, but I do teach development, social and personality development. So I teach pretty much every semester. I walk my students through the personality development and emotional development and the stages of and all of that stuff. And so I get very frustrated when I have friends who are parents on Facebook or social media who are talking about their struggles, and then invariably there is some comment person who's just like, well, your kid just doesn't know how to behave, or like, you should just do this, or your kid should understand this. And I get very frustrated on behalf of the parent because I'm just like, you don't, just stop, right? This is
Yeah.
not the place for you to be critiquing parenting. This is not the place for that. It's like, this is a place for validation and support, not a place for any of that mess. So just, you're hearing it now, right here. Any parents who are listening to this, you're doing a great job. Just keep doing
Yeah.
what you're doing. Do your
And
best. And anybody who tries to tell you differently, just stop listening to that.
And what Miley is explaining, like that sounds really hard. You're talking about, basically, I don't want to sound hopeless 'cause I'm sure you can, we can always, we are psychologists. We know how to do operant conditioning like all over again, but it would be really hard. I know if I were a parent to have worked so hard on something like a core value, like, okay, I don't want my child in front of screens all day, and I work on this for the first 3 years of their life, and we're a team with my partner about it, and like that takes a lot of discipline and commitment from you too as a parent. And now you're like out of control and just have to like throw out this thing that you highly have valued and committed yourself to. Like that's got to feel like a loss too.
It does for
Does it?
sure.
Yeah. I was just
Yeah,
wondering. That's how I was feeling it like very vicariously through you.
and
I'm
also
sorry.
you wonder about the long-term impacts. I mean, because all these studies are coming out, for instance, like that if you put a child in front of the screen, they actually have less gray matter in their brain. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really, really disturbing, and the fact that they don't have those the connections within their brains uh, that they normally would, because even though a lot of parents are like, oh, I'm going to put my kid in front of the TV, it's an educational program. It's no substitute for actually interacting with your child. And
Right.
so, like, I think it's fine to have screen time where you're interacting as a family and you're having a conversation about it. But I think it can be a danger when you just leave your child in front of the TV for hours on end. I mean, it can lead to language delays, all sorts of things. But
Sure, but that's like best case scenario. And when you in a perfect world or right when everything's running how it's supposed to, then yeah, you limit screen time. Whereas now we are not in this perfect world, and so people kind of have to do what they have to do. So that creates that tension or that point of anxiety, like we've been talking about, of how how far can I give and not experience those negative effects.
And
right,
I want to throw out too that we're talking, and this is not at all to take away from your personal experience, Miley, because everyone has their own personal experience that matters. But we are all talking about this like on a Zoom call with these resources to self quarantine at homes, meaning like we have homes. We're talking about the context of like if you and your partner are both like working from home, for example, or even maybe you're working from home. But there's a lot of people right now who can't work from home and their kids are being like shuttled to somebody else's house or God knows where, or aren't being supervised during the day at all. And so I think we have to think about the
oh
kids
no.
too. Oh, is she right there?
Yeah.
What a
Back on the
Yeah.
line?
what a timely
You
interruption.
good?
I
Thank
know.
you. Yeah, perfect.
Well,
All right, and we're back. We had a little bit of a reshuffle here. Miley had to go down so her little one could go to sleep. So she's in a different spot, and it shifted all the videos around. So here we're back. And Angie, I want to come back to you because you were saying some things about how the context of how we're discussing this and how other people have different contexts. So please go ahead with that.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to make the point of, what we're talking about, is important, certainly. I think there's a lot of people that are experiencing what we've been talking about in the context of like their own home and because they're working from home with their children or with their relationship partner and so forth. But I think it's also important for us to think about, especially thinking about children more broadly, how this is going to impact them, particularly for those who don't have these resources. We're having this conversation over WebEx, for example. And so we have, resources to do that. We have Wi-Fi, we have computers, we are privileged, right? Having this conversation. And that doesn't mean that you should feel bad for being stressed if you're privileged, because we all have our own source of stress. And in my opinion, they all matter. They certainly matter based on data. Your perceived stress certainly impacts you under the skin, and it crosses all kinds of boundaries, including socioeconomic status, income level, and so forth. But if we think about, a parent who isn't able to stay home with their child because they are an essential worker, for example, what is their child doing all day? What are they thinking about their child doing all day? How is that influencing the family dynamic? And so, um, you know, fortunately and unfortunately, we aren't one of those demographic, but I would like us to at least just acknowledge that that is happening in some form for people that we're not capturing here. So I think we should think about that.
I think that's a really great point, and there are likely people who might be listening to this who are saying, "I just wish I could be that person who
Right.
is in their situation," and we certainly acknowledge that, and uh, yeah, so I, and wish the best. I mean, I wish there was something we could do, some kind of resources we could offer there as well. But yeah,
And hopefully at
definitely.
some point we can, once I feel like with that whole like big energy upheaval we were talking about, I think it's going to start balancing out, right? And the new normal is going to come about, and there are being more resources created for people in need. But we have to keep doing that in order to really, keep helping more and more people. We have to react to this big shift in the energy, shift in, the demands of us in our different roles as parents, as teachers, as whatever it is that we do with our life and for society. And I think that we have to kind of buck up, so to speak.
Absolutely, because we were talking about stress testing the system and how we found these weaknesses that we knew were there and now have become points of failure. And so it's our
Yeah.
job to fix those points of failure. I mean, we have to address those now because they're so glaringly obvious. Yes, Smiley.
so being in a nursing school is really brought, being a psychologist in a nursing school is a really unusual place to be. But it really, some of the topics that we discuss are very different from what I'm used to. For instance, like when we were talking in our last faculty meeting, we were talking about how families who have a nurse um, or even two nurses as primary caregivers within the family, how are they coping, and what are they doing to protect their families too? So some of the nurses had discussed how they are basically quarantining themselves from their family. Some nurses have mentioned that they've actually they'll go to their friends' houses that where it's just the two of them, and they go in shifts, and they come up with a plan so that they can stay away from their families, so that their families are safe, or families creating different environments so they still go to the same home, but the father comes in a different route in the house,
Yeah. Has
just to
like a
kind of
safe room or something.
yeah, has a safe room, which is really kind of heartbreaking too, because you're already going through this really stressful event as a healthcare worker, and then you can't even share that with your family. I mean,
Right.
I can't even imagine what that's like. Or the fact that, that, you know, that you may not be able to, if you're separating yourself from your family, in order to keep them safe, knowing that this may be the last time that you see your family member, because people are basically dying, and you're not allowed to see them when they die. And that just must be such a stressful thing to go through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Before we move on from kids, Miley, you had said that you wanted to talk about kids acting out in this situation. Do you want to touch on that real fast?
Yeah, so I know with my daughter, she's 3, and obviously she can't express herself in many ways, or maybe the manifestation of her expressing herself means that she's more obstinate or difficult, or has a lot of temper tantrums and so forth. And it's been challenging because obviously her parents are both stressed as well. But I think one thing that I've been able to kind of keep in the back of my mind is like knowing that she has no other way of communicating her stress. She has no other way of like kind of um, having a reaction to having everything that she has known so far taken away from her at a moment's notice. I mean,
Right.
she didn't get to say goodbye to her friends. I mean, she didn't get to say goodbye to her teachers. Some of her teachers are furloughed. I don't know if they're even going to come back. So just having that really ripped away for her has really probably been very unsettling for her. And as a result, she has had these temper tantrums, which are really, really difficult to deal with when you're already stressed. But then also, she can be moody. So for instance, we went and visited a friend before this whole crisis began. And all of a sudden, she started breaking out down in tears over this argument she had with this friend, like before the crisis began. And I'm like, and it was a fight over rings. So they had the little plastic rings, and she was like, "Why didn't Adelaide give me the red ring?" And she was just like bawling over it. And I'm like, "I'm sorry, baby, that you had to deal with that, but knowing that these emotions are not really coming from that, but it's stemming from this whole uncertainty that we're already feeling, but then she has no other way to express that." And then also not having that regular routine that we normally have. Kids thrive on routine. And of course, we've tried to make it as normal as possible for her. But just not having that whole regular routine where you wake up in the morning and you get dressed, and having that predictability, I think, has also increased her uh, obstinance to going to bed, which
Yeah.
makes it even more challenging for us because she just does not want to go to sleep anymore. And then I'm like waiting for her to go to sleep so that I can go to work. But it
Right.
seems like the more I try to get her to sleep, the more she senses my anxiety over it, the more
Right, and
she
she's
doesn't
up.
want to go to sleep.
Mhm.
And
Well, and our
so
children use us for physiological regulation, right? And so if mom is physiologically dysregulated, which we basically have just been talking about the whole time, you're anxious, you probably haven't been, you said you haven't been sleeping as well. Like their circadian rhythms are synced up with ours. And so I'm sure, and like that just sounds like the never ending battle because then it's just feeding off of each other
Yeah.
the whole time.
yeah, because she's not getting enough sleep either, probably,
Sure.
for what she needs, and then that's obviously feeding into the temper tantrums and so forth, and just trying to keep her cool under that, and knowing that she's also going through stress, and also that this is going to be a very impactful time for her in terms of her life. That's been really hard for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is
You know?
hard.
Yeah.